Hello, and welcome to another episode where we attempt to fall asleep, but we succeed because we have the help of Habibi Spice, who is me. If you are new to this channel, hello. If you are not new to this channel, hello. You are welcome to make yourself comfortable because we are going to be sleeping. Shocker, yes? You click on sleep meditation video and you do not expect to sleep? That's on you. We are going to sleep whether you like it or not. It is September, and in Los Angeles, the heat wave just ended, which means it is now time for a spooky season, Halloween season. You know what that means? It means it's Halloween season. I just said it means it's Halloween season. I am going to be reading tonight. We are going to be diving into tonight Frankenstein, which was also provided by a viewer, Frankenstein. Classic. Say classic. Now, if you're not familiar with Frankenstein, I cannot help you. Habibi, this is really on you. Who is not familiar with Frankenstein? So maybe do Google search, but I'm sure you're smart enough. If you click on this video, you're smart enough, probably, most likely. Sorry, Habibi Larry. We're going to begin with chapter 1. Captain Robert Walton meets Victor Frankenstein. The Arctic wind chilled me to the bone as I stood on deck, looking out at the frozen land around me. I was in the North Pole. My lifelong dream to come here was now a reality. But at what cost to me and my men? Our ship was trapped on the ice, and we did not know if we would live or die. I felt foolish. The entire trip had gone terribly wrong. My need to see a part of the world untouched by human beings had turned my trip into a complete disaster. The world is untouched by human beings, but the world touched him as a human being. We had ended up so far north because of my own actions. I should have taken the first chance to turn around, but I refused and stubbornly drove on. Typical human ego. I didn't care how unhappy it made my crew. My spirit was broken, but I was determined not to quit. Time passed very slowly. Most days I wished I had a good friend to keep me company. Habibi, you have your whole crew. You're telling me not a single one of them is a friend? I wanted someone I could talk to during the long, cold nights. I missed having friends more than anything else in the world. Yes, I had a crew of great men on board my ship, but they took orders from me. They were not my friends. Habibi, order them to listen to you. By the next morning, the situation had gotten worse. The ship was completely surrounded by ice. We could do nothing but wait. By mid-afternoon, the fog cleared from the sky and we were able to see more. White snow and ice stretched out from the ship in every direction. One of the men pointed out a strange sight in the distance. We watched as a sled being pulled by a large man headed even farther north. The whole crew watched until the man and his sled disappeared on the ice. We turned to one another and asked, "Who was that? What was that?" As far as we knew, there were no people in this part of the world. The next morning, I came out on deck to find my sailors talking to someone over the side of the ship. Could it be the man? I leaned over the side and saw a man floating on a piece of ice. Maybe it's Frozone from The Incredibles. All around him were pieces of a broken sled. The ice must have drifted toward us in the night. My men tried to convince him to board our ship, so he wouldn't drown. Something told me that this was not the same man we had seen yesterday. That creature had looked wild and savage, not entirely human. This man was European, and he spoke with a thick accent. "My name is Victor Frankenstein," he shouted. "Before I come on board, can you please tell me where you are going?" "I am Captain Robert Walden," I answered. "This is my ship, and we are on a voyage to the North Pole." Frankenstein was wrapped in many layers of fur, but he still looked cold. "You must come on board. You will freeze out there." The man nodded. A couple of my sailors threw down some rope and helped him climb on board. Congratulations. Hopefully they will save him. Frankenstein was almost frozen and in a terrible state. He was pale and thin, and it was clear that he needed a good warm meal. I could tell that he had been through a hard time. "Oh yeah? You're so observant." Even before we could get him into a warm cabin, he fainted. We wrapped him up in warm blankets and made him drink a cup of hot tea. He got better slowly and then ate some soup. When he started to look and feel better, I threw him overboard. I'm just kidding, imagine. I moved him into my cabin. For some reason, I wanted to help him as much as I could. Maybe you're in love with him. He tossed and turned in his sleep that first night. There was a great sadness in his eyes, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. What a surprise to find a man in the middle of the Arctic Sea. The sailors wanted to ask him a million questions, but Frankenstein was still sick and didn't want them to bother him too much. One night after dinner, my first mate, Hardy, came to visit. What do you mean? Was he on the ship? Or he came to visit from out of state? It's like, hey, I'm going to the Arctic to meet my friend. Frankenstein stopped smiling, and the dark look came into his eyes. "I was chasing someone who ran away from me." Hardy paused and then said, "Was he traveling on the same kind of sled?" Frankenstein looked straight at him. "Yes. How did you know that?" "I think we saw him. We saw a man pulling the same kind of sled across the ice." "It must be the monster," Frankenstein yelled. "Which way did he go? Did you see if he made it across the ice? How fast was he going?" "To the north, but that's all we could see," Hardy answered. A pale Frankenstein lay back down on the bed. "That's enough for now," I said. "He needs his rest. I'll see you in the morning, Hardy." Hardy nodded politely and took his leave. Frankenstein put his head down in the pillow and said softly, "You must want to know how I got here and what I'm doing. You are polite not to ask." "You need to get your strength back," I said. "That's far more important than answering any questions that I might have." Frankenstein smiled gently at me. But you saved my life. I'm in your debt. I don't know why I made him Russian, but he's Russian. Get over it. None of that is important now. You need rest. After a quiet moment, Frankenstein asked, "Do you think the ice broke up enough to destroy other sled? Do you think it's forever lost?" I told him that it was hard to know for sure, because the ice was still solid. Frankenstein fell back into deep thought. "I should like to go back on deck," he said. "I need to watch for that sled." "No," I said strongly. "You are far too weak. The air is far too cold. I'll get one of my men to watch out for the sled." "Thank you, Robert," he smiled. "That is so kind." The next few days passed without event. Frankenstein's health got better, but he was still weak and spent a lot of time thinking. He's a ponderer, this guy. Despite his sadness, Frankenstein and I talked until late most nights. "Your dream come true. You now have a friend." That's why he didn't want him to go on board, because he wanted to talk, he wanted to yap. He became the very friend I so wanted to have on this unlucky journey. All I wanted to do was help him in any way I could. Frankenstein was gentle, wise, and smart. The more I got to know him, the harder it was for me to watch him suffer. We spoke one night about my Arctic voyage. I told him the whole story, and then, for some reason, I grew upset. I said harshly, "I worry that you think me silly, Frankenstein, for spending all my money and for pushing my men so hard to get here. I don't know why it is so important to find lands no man has ever seen before. Something inside of me pushes me forward, and I fear nothing will stop me until I have succeeded. I hope you can understand and not think less of me." Frankenstein's eyes filled with tears when he heard the passion in my voice. He cried out, "Unhappy man, Robert. You must listen carefully to my story. You must know danger of such strong wishes." I was surprised by his outburst. "What story, Frankenstein? What are you talking about?" "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "Please forgive me for speaking so sharply. Let's talk about something else, shall we?" At his wish, I changed the subject. We talked about my childhood and my sister in England, and then we went to sleep. "Is this all you did, Habibi? Are you sure?" Frankenstein apologized again the next morning. "Robert, I didn't mean yell at you. You see, I have lost everything that I love in this world, including my wife and a dear friend. I want to tell you the whole story. I think it may help you to find your own way." Okay. And this was chapter 1. I'm going to read chapter 2 as well, since the chapter is so short. It's interesting because he wanted best friend, he is in the Arctic. He went to the land where no man has ever been, but then he wished that he had a friend. Habibi, if you want to find a friend, go into the city. Did he expect to find a friend going into the Arctic? Maybe he's not very clever, this captain. Chapter 2. The story of Victor Frankenstein, told in his own words. I will read this normally, not in his accent, because this is all him talking. My family comes from Geneva, so he's not Russian. My father worked hard when he was a young man. So hard, in fact, that he thought of nothing other than his duty to his country. Even love seemed less important. He didn't marry until he was much older. The true nature of my father's goodness can be seen in the story of how he and my mother came to be married. My father had a dear friend named Beaufort, who lost everything and fell on hard times. His life as he knew it was ruined. Beaufort barely had enough money to pay back what he owed before he and his daughter moved to Lucerne. After what had happened, Beaufort did not want to see his friends. He was a proud man who didn't want to see what had become of him. For 10 long years, my father looked for his friend. He thought he could make Beaufort come home. He wanted to help him get back on his feet again. When he finally found him, the situation was far worse than my father had imagined. Beaufort was very sick. His daughter, Caroline, had lost her job because she had to care for him. Together, they had little more than a few cents to rub together. In spite of her hard life, Caroline had remained kind and tender-hearted. My father saw this and fell in love with her. So cute. Beaufort's health grew worse, and he died within a few months. Habibi, give me a warning before killing him. He died within a few months. Caroline was very upset. Not only was she poor, but now she was all alone in the world. Maybe she should go to the Arctic and find a friend. The day of her father's funeral, she cried and cried. What else could she do? She fell down beside the coffin and wept. Her father's death upset her, but she also wondered what would happen to her now. My father gently lifted her up from her knees. He told her that he would bring her back to Geneva and take care of her. They married 2 years later. Despite the difference in their ages, my parents had a happy marriage. They loved and respected each other. My father left his job to spend more time with her. Long years caring for her father had made my mother's own health poor. To make her feel better, my parents traveled to the warmer climates of Italy. I was born in Naples and went with them on all of their trips. My parents loved me completely. When I was 5 years old, we visited Lake Como. My mother often helped out with poor families during our travel. She wanted to give back to the world, helping others, just as my father had helped her. During our stay on Lake Como, she came across a man and his wife caring for their very large family. A pretty girl with fair skin, blonde hair, and beautiful blue eyes stood out from the rest. She was very sweet, and my mother fell in love with her at once. My mother visited with the family for many days and spent a lot of time helping the poor mother and her large family. She brought food and clothes, spent time with the children, and had a lovely time. During her stay, my mother watched the beautiful girl closely. She saw her gentle nature, her good manners, and her kind laugh. One afternoon, my mother and the woman sat talking. The children were playing in front of them, laughing and running. The woman told my mother that the girl was not her daughter, Yi. She had come to the family after her parents had died, leaving her an orphan, Ya Haram. The woman said that although the girl had come from a rich family, she had no money now. My mother's heart almost burst at that moment. The girl's story was so similar to her own that she asked if the girl could come live with us. The woman agreed, and that's how the beautiful Elizabeth Lavenza came to live as a part of our family. I loved Elizabeth from the first time I saw her. She was a bright and charming child who became my whole world. We never fought or even spoke a mean word to each other. We were very different, but that only made us love one another even more. Elizabeth loved poetry and pretty things. Wildflowers, sunshine, and butterflies. I loved science, the natural world, and great thinkers. The world was a big secret that I wanted to solve. Elizabeth liked how things looked, but I wanted to figure out what made them work. We worked together on all of our studies, spending hours walking about the fields, swimming in the lakes, and reading until all hours of the night. After my brother Ernest was born, my parents decided to return home for good. We settled into a house in Geneva and bought a small cottage in Bellerive, on the eastern shore of Lake Geneva. We lived in the country far more than in the city. It was a great place to grow up. Elizabeth and I spent every morning together. Every moment, not morning. We were often joined by our friend, Henry Clerville. He was outgoing and fun-loving. We three were as different as night and day, but we loved one another all the same. The three of us had a very happy childhood. They were my best friends, and I knew we would always be close. I was a serious child with a very busy mind. I wanted to learn everything and anything. The secrets of heaven and earth fascinated me to no end, and all I thought about was the world around me. How does it work? Why are we here? How did we all get here? What makes something alive? If my studies made me rough and angry, as they often did, Elizabeth would calm me down. When I became too focused on one subject, Henry made me laugh. As I grew older, I fell deeper and deeper into my studies. The power of modern science amazed me. I read all the time and filled my notebook after notebook with my thoughts. The words of scientists became my life. The more I studied, the more I wanted to know. I read more and more, but the more I read, the more upset I became. Stop reading, Habibi. No one scientist ever really answered my questions. No one book ever told me exactly what I wanted to know. My mind raced on and on, often all night. My friends and family were kind and ignored my moods. They were supportive, even though I spent far too much time with my nose buried in dusty old books. Nature remained a wonder and a mystery to me. I looked for the secret of life. In truth, I wanted to create life, but I knew I could not do so. Time and money meant little to me. The only thing I cared about was making a great discovery. Maybe I could save humankind from disease. Maybe I could stop a violent death. Perhaps I could finally answer those mysterious questions. The summer I turned 15, we were staying at our summer house. A violent and terrible storm came on almost without warning. Thunder burst high in the sky. The heavens were alive with flashes of light. I stood at our back door and stared at the clouds, watching the weather unfold. Suddenly, thunder boomed all around. A split second later, a bolt of lightning crashed from the sky and hit an old oak tree right in front of me. The force of the blast split this tree in half, and it burst into flames. When I went out to look at the tree the next morning, all I found was a burned stump and wood scattered everywhere. I became very focused on electricity. I needed to know how all that power found its way into a bolt of lightning. I started with the basics and taught myself math. I knew the basics held the key to make my own power. The logic of numbers soon swam around my brain. Maybe if I had known then what would happen to me in later years, I would have stopped. But fate worked in its own way, and the storm happened for a reason. And that is the end of chapter 2. What do we think happened to this poor Frankenstein guy? What do we think his story was? Why was he so distraught later in life? Maybe we will find out soon. Or maybe it is very obvious. We know that the captain, Mr. Captain, is stupid because this guy, he went to the Arctic to treat it like dating app. No, there is no one here to talk to, Habibi. You went to the North Pole. Now, how about you go into the North Pole? Put on a nice fur coat, put on a fire, and go to sleep. Because I will see you next time. Maybe we will read more of the story. Okay. But for now, good night from me and from Larry, who is passed out.